The Vessel That Drinks Three Oceans. Chapter 3. 8 passengers and no one explaining anything. The two-beat click had been with her since the first step into the salon, but only on the return from the corridor with Mireille did the sound open into something more granular. Crossing the marble floor, a second layer resolved beneath it, the dry tick of yarn pulling against bone, not metal. The needles were pale, slightly yellowed, the polish of long use catching the lamplight along their length in a low, continuous gleam. Solange did not look up. The chair facing hers was empty. A small low table between them held a brass thimble in a porcelain dish, and beside the dish, a wooden basket from which a pale silver-grey fleece had been drawn without dye. Wisps of raw wool still clung to the basket's rim where the last handful had been pulled through. "Sit, then, if you are going to." The voice carried no welcome and no rejection. The voice of someone reporting an option that already existed. Lena sat. The chair received her with a slight inward give of velvet over old horsehair stuffing, the kind of seat recovered once or twice over the decades, and unchanged in essential character by either recovery. The arms were polished walnut. Her right thumb found a worn place where many thumbs had rested before her. For some time, neither of them spoke. The needles continued. From across the salon, the cartographer's pen laid down its slow ink. Mireille had returned to her porthole. The small glass bottle was once again cupped between her palms. The oil lamps breathed along the walls at their own interval, and the amber they exhaled moved across the marble floor in long, slow pulses that arrived and were gone before the eye could confirm them. The fabric in Solange's lap was gathered in soft folds, a long oblong, perhaps a meter, spilling over her knees toward the floor. The pattern, as far as it could be read from this angle, was no pattern Lena recognized. The stitches did not align in even rows. They ran in arcs, in convergent and divergent lines, in some places very close and in others more open, the density shifting without any organizing logic she could resolve from outside the work itself. Like contour lines, she thought. Then she revised. Not contour. More like the marks on the back of an old hand, carrying a record that had not been made with topography in mind. Solange's hands moved at the same two-beat. Click, slip, draw. The basket beside her shifted a fraction with each draw of yarn, the fibers feeding upward at exactly the rate the needles consumed them. The needles themselves were larger than they had seemed from across the room. Long, the bone worked smooth by years of passing through the same motion, the tips rounded by use rather than by any lathe. At the joint of Solange's index finger, a faint darkening of the skin, a callus placed exactly where the needle passed at each forward push. 6 years at a bench had given Lena the same callus, in the same position, from the loop. "What are you making?" The question rose ahead of any decision to ask it. The needles continued for 4 full beats before Solange answered. "The way back." A pause. The needles did not slow. "From where?" "From wherever the ship is going." Offered without irony, without elaboration, without any sense that the answer required a follow-up. Solange lifted the work briefly, turned it, examined the reverse. The same arcs appeared there in inverse, the whole fabric coherent from both directions. She lowered it and resumed. The basket of fleece sat at Solange's elbow, undyed, raw, the silver grey of a sheep that had spent a winter on a high pasture and been shorn before any chemical bath. The fibres carried a faint smell of lanolin and cold air. Far back in Lena's early childhood, on a school trip into the hills above Vevey, she had pressed her face into the fleece of a Romney ewe at a mountain farm and been astonished by the warmth the living animal kept and gave away without any visible diminishment. The smell here was the same smell. The basket might have been carried aboard yesterday morning from some hillside she had never visited, and nothing in the smell indicated otherwise. And before this one, Lena nodded toward the long oblong in Solange's lap. Was that one a wayback too? Solange smiled. The smile did not interrupt the rhythm of the needles. Her eyes did not lift. Each is its own. I do not keep them after. What happens to them? They go where they are needed. Lena let the answer rest. By degrees, without any deliberate decision, she had begun to understand something about the grammar of conversation aboard this vessel. Questions could be asked. Some were answered, some were not. The not answering carried no rudeness, no rebuff. It had the quality of a gentle declining, the equivalent of a thumb laid lightly against a watch's escapement to feel whether it had taken the wind. A touch that asked nothing, only confirmed a state. And the silence that followed a question that would not be answered had the same quality as the silence that followed one that had been. Both were the same silence, only differently arrived at. The needles ticked on. In the lamplight, the grain of the yarn was visible as it passed through Solange's fingers, the individual filaments of the undyed fleece twisting around one another in a slow, continuous helix, thicker in some places, finer in others, the variation too small to be a flaw and too consistent to be an accident. Lena looked at it for some time without looking away or supplying a thought about it. The thimble in its porcelain dish caught the lamplight and held a small bright point on its rounded top. The table between them was a thing that had been sat at in this configuration many times before. 2 chairs, an object of work on one side, whatever the person on the other side had brought. Then, from below the salon floor, a sound came through the planking before it arrived in the ears. The soles of her boots delivered it first. A slow vibration in the deck, low and held, a single sustained tone whose source was somewhere deep in the ship below. The marble underfoot was unchanged. The vibration continued. Solange's needles slowed by half a beat, then resumed. "He has begun," Solange said. "Who has begun?" "Listen." The note grew very gradually in volume, a single low pitch, sustained, with overtones rising around it the way harmonics rose from a struck tuning fork, the fundamental unchanged, and the upper voices arriving from within it. It came up through the velvet of her chair, through the walnut of the arm where her thumb still rested, through the brass of the lamp standard beside her. The crystal water glass on Solange's small table began to ring at the same pitch. The sound arrived in Lena's chest at the sternum, already inside the bone, before the ear had finished naming it as sound. She pressed a palm flat against the chair arm and held it there. Solange did not introduce him. The needles continued. The fleece in the basket diminished. Lena rose. Her boots took her toward the corridor at the back of the salon, away from the porthole, away from Mireille, in the direction of the sound. Her right hand went into her left coat pocket. Her thumb pressed the burr at the gap of the gear's 24 teeth. The corridor was as it had been. Panelled walls, oil lamps in their brackets, the long row of frames containing leaves and shells and pins, and a single empty rectangle of glass. The note moved with her, neither louder nor quieter, sustained at the same pitch, travelling through the structure of the ship rather than through the air. The corridor turned. A spiral staircase came down into the next deck. Cast brass, the treads polished to copper gold by long use. The central post bearing a slow patina of green at its joints. She went down. The counting was not deliberate. Her feet did it. 3, 6, 9. The 9th tread gave way to a lower corridor floor of dark cork. A door on the right stood half open, warm, low light from inside. She paused in the doorway. The room was small and low-ceilinged, walls panelled in walnut so dark the wood absorbed most of the lamplight, returning only the deepest tones of the polished grain. Bookshelves rose from floor to ceiling on 3 sides. The shelves were full. The spines of the books showed no titles, no authors, no embossed lettering of any kind, only colour. Whole sections of blue, sections of red, sections of gold, of silver, of brown. The deep, fast colours of dyed leather, binding, not paint, not paper. Colours that had been arrived at through long processes rather than applied to a surface. A round reading table at the centre of the room, a single oil lamp upon it, burning low. 2 chairs, both empty. The sustained note continued from somewhere further forward in the ship. Through these walls it came softer, the ship's structure absorbing most of it before it arrived here. The smell of the room preceded her examination of it. Lamp oil first, old book leather beneath that, and underneath both, a dryness with a specific source she could not immediately name. Cedar pencil shavings, she understood after a moment. The residue in a drawer that had once held cedar pencils, and now held only what the wood remembered of them. The detail arrived without anyone having placed it there for her. She stepped inside. She crossed to the nearest shelf and laid one fingertip against the spine of a blue book. The leather was warm, the temperature of a shelf in a room kept warm by oil lamps for many hours. The book came down without resistance. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside, no text. A coastline ran the length of the first page, drawn in fine indigo ink, cleanly, with the precision of an instrument she did not at first recognize. Then on closer inspection, the same nib, the same indigo she had seen in the cartographer's hand above. The coastline was elaborate, bays, headlands, an inlet running deep into the land for several kilometers, ending at the suggestion of a small harbor. Soundings dotted the offshore in tiny numerals: 47, 52, 60, 88. The depths increasing very rapidly to 312 within a short distance of land. That sharpness of descent stayed with her after her eye had moved on. The annotation in the margin was in a script that resembled Latin. Lena read enough Latin to manage the inscriptions on certain antique pocket watch movements, the brief honorifics inscribed by makers in Geneva and Neuchâtel. This was not quite Latin. Some of the words were familiar to the ear. Most were close to familiar in a way that meant they were not. A date was unambiguous: 23rd of July, 1614. She turned the page. A new coastline, another date, another set of soundings. The ink was the same indigo, fresh and glossy in a way that suggested it had not had centuries to dry. She turned again. A third coastline, oriented differently on the page, the land mass at the top and the open water below, the soundings deepening in the other direction. A date in an era she could not place. She turned further. The book went on. Each page a different coast, a different date, some annotated in the Latin that was not quite Latin, and some in scripts she had no frame for at all, scripts that curved rather than crossed, that rose from the baseline rather than sitting on it. She closed the book at last. The leather was warm under both palms. A blue book belonged on a blue shelf. She returned it with the care she gave every component going back to the velvet mat. Then she took down a brown one. This book was thicker. She set it on the table and opened it. A single page. The paper creamy, the ink indigo, the drawing a single flowering branch lying horizontally across the paper. She turned the page. The same image. She turned again. The same. Kept turning, and on each new sheet the branch occupied very nearly the same position, with differences too small to track without comparing two adjacent pages directly. The angle of one leaf adjusting by a degree, a bud opening incrementally on the third blossom from the left. The whole book was a slow time lapse of one branch flowering. Toward the back, the branch had gone past its bloom. A few petals had fallen across the page, each one rendered with the same line weight as the branch itself. The falling given exactly the same care as the opening. She set the brown book down on the table and stood with both palms on the cover. At the reading table in the library of a ship that was no longer on any lake, with the lamp oil smell around her and the cedar shavings underneath, both hands on a book that had recorded a branch opening and closing over some number of pages that she had not thought to count. The note from the forward structure continued through the walnut into her palms. She put the brown book back and took down a gold one. The leather was different from the blue or brown, thicker, the grain finer, almost smooth, the dye so deep it had no lighter side when she tilted it toward the lamp. She set it on the table and opened it. The pages were blank. All of them. She turned through 20, 30, 40 pages, each one the same creamy paper, unlined and unmarked. No ink, no coastline, no branch. She kept turning to the final page before the back cover, and on that last page, at the lower right corner, a single small mark. The ghost of a fingerprint in dried indigo, so faint she might have attributed it to the paper's own age, except for its precision, the ridged spiral of it, clear in the lamplight when she tilted the page. She looked at it for some time. Then she closed the gold book and replaced it. She stood for a moment in the library with her hands at her sides. The sustained note from elsewhere in the ship modulated. It dropped a half step, held, then shifted upward by something that was not quite a half step. Some interval between, unnamed in any scale she knew. The water glass in the salon above would be ringing at the new pitch, the crystal droplets in the dining room, the pen nib in the cartographer's hand perhaps, the brass railing on the open deck. By this point, something in the quality of the note had begun to carry a character she recognized from the bench, not an abstraction to be tracked to its source, but evidence. A movement under examination did not need to be lifted from the velvet. It told her what it was from exactly where it had been laid down, if the person doing the examining was willing to hold still long enough and not reach. The watchmaker's understanding of this had taken years to earn. Lena pressed both palms flat on the reading table and let the note come up through the wood and into her hands and stay there. After a while, she went up. Coming back into the salon, she crossed in front of the boy. He stood at the porthole on the port side, the same porthole he had been at perhaps half an hour earlier, looking out at the indigo water, both hands held loose at his sides, white high-collared shirt, grey trousers, straight black hair across the brow. He did not turn as she passed. The lamp on the table beside him cast its warm cone across the marble floor. The lamp standard threw a long, thin shadow toward the opposite wall. The chair near the lamp threw a wider shadow at the same angle. The boy threw nothing. The marble at his feet was undisturbed light marble. The lamplight that should have been intercepted by his body fell on the floor on the other side of him, slightly diffused but unbroken by any shape. She walked on. Her step did not alter. Her hand stayed in her pocket. The fact settled into the part of the mind that received things before knowing what to do with them. The same place the coastline, with its 400-year-old ink, had gone. The same place the blank gold pages and the single fingerprint had gone. A drawer that was not yet ready to be opened. The boy stood at his porthole, and the lamp cast no shadow for him, and the salon went on around both of them with its two beat and its slow ink and its amber light. Mireille at the next porthole had seen it. A small sideways look passed between them, and from Mireille a half smile that contained no explanation and no reassurance, the expression of someone who has seen another person receive a fact and finds the receiving sufficient. The bottle in Mireille's hands was now corked. A label on its side bore writing too small to read at this distance. The chair by the alcove was where she had left it. The coffee on the small table was still warm. More time had passed than the warmth allowed for, yet warm it was. Not hot, not cold. Precisely the temperature a person would choose to drink. Both hands around the cup, the ceramic warm against her palms. She lifted it and drank. Across the salon, the cartographer was selecting a fresh sheet of paper. He flicked the nib upward over the table. 6 small beads of indigo ink left the pen and stopped in midair, suspended in the lamplight, holding their spherical shape at perhaps 30 centimeters above the tabletop. They hung in a loose constellation and did not fall. After some seconds, they began, one by one, to drift back toward the nib, completing the return in reverse, and the nib received them until the page was being drawn upon with what she would have sworn was the original quantity of ink intact. The cup went down on its saucer with a small dry click. No standing, no crossing to the corner table. The completed sheet from his earlier work lay at the top of a small stack beside his right hand. Even from across the salon, the topmost sheet was readable. A layout of the room as seen from directly above. The chairs in their places. His own table at the corner. The porthole windows along the starboard wall. And in the chair by the alcove, a single small figure in a dark coat. One hand around a coffee cup. The figure had her hair. The sustained note from below had ended. In its place, a slow phrase in a scale she did not recognize. 3 steps down, and a held lowest tone. then the same pattern from a different starting pitch, open as the horizon she had not yet seen, patient as arithmetic. She finished her coffee and set the cup on its saucer. Through the soles of her boots, the deck altered its quality of response. Not a sound, a change in the way the hull was meeting the water beneath it, as though some weight had begun to lift from the keel, and the air ahead were taking on a temperature the ship was already preparing to meet. She held still. Through the leather, through the marble, through the long structure of the ship in the water, the change arrived in the bones of her feet, and she let it arrive. Outside the porthole, the indigo had begun to lighten by a degree the eye would have missed if the eye had not been looking for the change.